I've done a number of episodes on psychoanalysis for the show. I've talked with Jonathan Lear at Chicago all about Freud, and he's wonderful. And I've also talked to Slavoj Žižek a number of times, but he thinks more about psychoanalysis as a form of cultural criticism, I think. And I'm wondering how it functions broadly in your work.
Well, I think that it would be hard to recount. In Gender Trouble, a long time ago, I suggested that well, I was commenting on the fact that during the AIDS crisis in the U.S., that it was very often the case that it was hard to acknowledge the losses that gay people were experiencing, gay men in particular, and that there wasn't a public recognition of those losses, and there were very often problems with families, like you couldn't tell your mother or your father that your lover had died because they didn't know you had a lover, even though this has been the most important person to you for 5 years, or whatever it may be. So there's a question of the denial of grief or the denial of loss that Freud characterizes as melancholia. And the distinction between mourning and melancholia has been really important to my work. Usually, at least in his early essay on that, he talks about knowing what it is you've lost when you're mourning. But melancholia is a condition in which you've lost something, but you have no idea what it is or you cannot name it. And then I just thought, well, how many people live with unnameable losses? Like, how many people live with losses they cannot share or for which there is no name? So I've been doing a lot of work in my post-gender years on the question of who is grievable, like within wars, for instance. Why is it we grieve one group of people so emphatically while other groups of people are considered as dispensable?
This will be interesting if we talk about Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, well, we'll see if we can get there.
You've mentioned inclusion a lot in this conversation, and from speaking with many psychoanalysts, I know that they think that psychoanalysis has an inclusion problem because of how expensive it is as a therapy.
Yeah.
Some analysts, like Jonathan Lear, don't actually charge anything, which is laudable, but most have very lofty rates because it takes a lot of training, and therapy is many times a week and for many years. And I'm curious then if you view it more as a tool for your analysis as a philosopher, or if you also think it's a worthwhile treatment. Like, have you been analyzed by any chance?
Well, I've certainly had therapy that's psychoanalytically informed. But, I mean, Jonathan Lear, for whom I have great admiration, luckily has a good salary at the University of Chicago, and he's an amazing person in many ways, and it doesn't surprise me that generous acts are attributed to him, because that is definitely what he does. I think psychoanalysis can also be a form of cultural criticism. Slavoj, I'm sure, agrees with that. I think psychotherapy can be offered to people at an affordable rate that brings insights from psychoanalysis into it. And I think we also have forms of social work that are informed by psychoanalysis, that are publicly financed, or at least partially so. So I think there's different access to it. I mean, people read it, they write dissertations about it. It's also an academic field, and professionals also have an academic, professional analysts have an academic dimension, which is clinical and remains extremely important, at least in parts of the world that haven't disputed psychoanalysis altogether. And so, I think it needs to be popularly available. I think it should be more affordable, but for that to happen, there would have to be public funding and support, and also it would have to be part of the kinds of psychological services that are covered by insurance.
One thing that might be of interest to some of our listeners is I have heard that if you go through a psychoanalytic institute, which these exist in big cities,
Yes.
you can often find psychoanalysts in training who can lower their rate significantly, especially if you're in need, because they need their training.
That's right. They need to amass a certain number of hours, and they charge at a lower rate. You may not get the experience of an older psychoanalyst, but you might get a more open mind, somebody who's kind of thinking anew about psychoanalysis.